Welcome, everyone. I'm Jennifer Avila. Most of you have seen my name and emails, lots of different places around, so finally get to put a face to a name that's been bombarding you with emails. Sorry about that. Today we are at our max online of 50 attendees, so if there's anyone in the UDOT complex that is watching from their desk, we'd appreciate it if you came down so that we could free up some of those spaces, or if you're in a different region, just make sure that you guys are collaborating in a conference room to watch together, just so that other people from outside of the state and outside agencies are able to join in. So I just want to start with a quick update on the project. We started this project about a year ago. We did build a consultant subgroup to help us facilitate that and test and get all the requirements in place for us. So we did have a group of 8 consultants that helped us with the requirements and design of the system, making sure everything was input. They helped us do our testing. And so we really appreciate all their help and support getting that done. Electronic invoicing is something that we've been pushing for a long time. Quite a while. They've tried it more times than I know. So we're glad to finally get this in place and get it going. Today, really what the main goal is to walk you through how a consultant would enter an invoice for each invoice type. So we'll be looking at unit price contracts, cost plus fixed fee, and then lump sum contracts. In order to keep it on task and get us out of here in about an hour and a half, what I'd like to do is show you how we input the invoice and then have you ask questions after, because I do want it interactive. I want your feedback. I want to make sure that if you see something on the screen that I didn't cover, that you get the opportunity to ask about that. We're being recorded, so I'll probably repeat your question when you ask it. Nothing weird, just so that we pick it up on audio. This is being streamlined and recorded, so this will be online. So if there's anybody else that needs to watch this later from your organization, they're able to do that. Also, I'm not using a mic so that the recording online, we're not getting multiple mic feedback. If you can't hear me at any time, let me know. Try and talk louder or move forward. I'm not used to being stuck behind a podium when I'm doing this, so my initial response is to walk out. Unfortunately, I'm stuck because I have to drive this computer. So if there's anything at any time, I'll stop and answer questions at the end of the demo. So just going to jump right in so we can get started. I'm going to start with a couple of different scenarios. So the first one I'm going to start with is a cost plus fixed fee invoice. And what that is basically it's your cost plus. So you have a little bit of more flexibility in your contract to add your actual prices instead of unit price where you're locked in. I'm going to start with this one and show you as if it was the first invoice that you're entering in the system. The reason why I say the first invoice is because a lot of invoice contracts are already in process, and we have a screen that you're going to have to enter in a cumulative amount for all the invoicing that you've already billed for, or that's already been paid out, or that you've submitted, or is in transit. So that will all be accounted for within the system. Entering the system is going to be the exact same way. You do have to have a user profile and EPM. The access is going to be granted for everyone, all the account administrators. So consultants maintain their own user accounts. It'll automatically be added to that administrative task to where they can add it out, they can view it. It'll also be added to the consultant PM, but in a view-only access. So if you are with a consulting firm, your administrator will need give you access if you have the right to create these invoices. If not, if you're just the PM and need to view it or whatever your internal process may be, that'll be automatically added to your profile. Okay, so I'm just going to log in right now as a consultant. For training and testing purposes, I've created a fictitious account called Transportation Consultant. You're going to see some stuff in here that isn't necessarily as pretty as a regular contract, but the information will work. Again, consultant, right here, it shows your name at the top. This is the view a consultant will see. This just going to reiterate that again. Logged in as Transportation Consultant. To access any of the invoicing screens, up at the top, you'd use the contract drop-down menu. 917 is a status screen similar to our 915 screen where all the contracts are managed. Everything will be found in that one screen, that 917 screen. I am in test and connected not directly in, so I'm connected through the Wi-Fi, so there is going to be a little bit slower than normal. Right now, you can see this invoice eligible is basically saying all of these contracts that are listed below, you can create an invoice against. I have a cost plus fixed fee and a unit price contract right here with a work task order attached. I also have a lump sum that's created but has not been paid by consultant service or comptrollers, my apologies. So I'm going to, when we get to lump sum, I'll show you how that's done and explain why you can't see that one right here right now. So I'm going to start by creating an invoice against a cost plus fixed fee contract. This top one, in order to create a new one, you can double click on the NTP date, or if it's against a certain contract, you have multiple listed there. You can use this field up here at the top to search that contract number. You can enter it in here to start a new one, or double click on the NTP date on the left-hand side of the screen. As you start an invoice, the first piece that's created is what we're calling a header. This is the main information on the contract that you're invoicing against. Before you start, you do have to have the firm's invoice number. So what that invoice number is the accounting number that comes out of your system. We use that as an auditing trail, so we have multiple numbers to contract it or verify it against and research it for auditing purposes. So I'm just going to enter in a test invoice here today and use the date. As a side note, that invoice number can be up to 20 characters long, can include special characters, capital numbers, letters, whatever it may be. So you can go ahead and use that however your system puts it out. If for some chance there's a company that uses it longer than 20, please let me know. We can modify the system to accommodate those requests. You'll also notice that this NTP date was 6/1/2018. The first invoice always defaults to the NTP date. Because most of you already have invoices that you've created against a contract, you'll just go to the month that you're actually billing for. Okay, I'm going to select, like I'm creating an invoice from August 1st through the end of August. So you enter in those dates, which are your work dates that correlate with your invoice date. The next piece of information the consultant has to enter is the address. Right now, it will default to the primary address, but in your 930 screen, your administrator can enter in a remittance address. If you select a remittance address, sometimes that payment address is different than your standard address. So that is something that the administrators will have to go in and update. At this point, that header that's all the information the consultant has to enter. If you click Save Invoice Header, the system knows, because it's not the NTP date, that additional information is required. Most of this information you can find from your last payment request. You typically filled it out every time you would request for a payment. So your raw labor is broken out. I'm just going to use simple numbers for ease of use. And the system will calculate it for you. So you'll look here, your invoice total. This is cumulative of everything that you've billed previously. Okay, so it was billed outside of CMS. Verify that against your records. Once you save it, it saves it as it's basically its own invoice. I'm just going to go over here to the Show Invoice History, and you can see what you've entered here. So all non-CMS invoice totals are the cumulative amount that was billed against the contract prior to CMS. Okay, so you'll be able to see that. The system was built really so you could use the tab and the enter key pretty quickly. You would enter in just the amount of hours that you have. Some of this is different. All of our consultants invoice differently. Some sum their hours and just use it as a backup documentation with all their labor reports. Some do it line item. However, our system is a cumulative amount. So you're entering one line item for each person. Okay. At the bottom of the screen here, once you enter in the hours for those employees, you can show the employees on invoice and only show the ones that are there. So it's just a quick way that you can QC against your own invoice. The other thing is, like I said, because it's cost plus fixed fee, and I keep saying that because there are just differences in the types of contracts there are. This one, if you need to add an employee, you have the ability to do that. So if we add Steve Smith, and we bill him for 2 hours. And really, his rate isn't $24.67, it's now $26 an hour. You can update that as well. Save it, and you can see here that it's now red. So red means that this is not on the original contract, but they've added it to the invoice. So that gives the PM or whoever's reviewing the invoice a quick way to understand that, okay, this has been added, I need to verify that that's correct. The other thing you can do as far as invoicing goes is if you have an employee that performed 2 job duties or did a pay raise in the middle of the month, whatever that might be, that little plus sign, and let me just return because I did that quite quickly. And hopefully it doesn't take me all the way out. Sorry. I returned to status instead of going back a screen.
We all do it too, Jen.
You know. All right. So since I did that, that's kind of a good segue or just a quick note. You'll see that everything you enter is automatically saved, just in an effort to save time. And if you accidentally leave the screen, everything's automatically saving. You don't have to save it. So I hit the wrong thing. Everything's saved that I entered in. But these plus signs on the side of the name basically create a second line item for the same person, but you can change the rate. So if mid-month Tom got a raise or had an evaluation, whatever that might be, you would be able to enter him in 2 hours at one rate and 2 hours at another, but it still identifies to the PM that there's a discrepancy from what the current rate is. That also, next time that this populates and they create an invoice against this, they do not have to, that higher rate will automatically populate. So as you have wage increases or salary reviews or whatever it is at any given time, it'll automatically save the most current rate that was invoiced for. Okay, so once you've entered in all your employees, again, you can narrow it down to see who you've actually invoiced for, and your labor section is complete. Your other direct charges, this again comes directly from your contract. So if you have these ODC items on your contract, they'll automatically populate here. Mileage is a big one. So I'm going to enter in 221 miles. What that does is the mileage only rounds that half cent one time. So the consultant will it'll never be a discrepancy more than a half a cent. So instead of rounding it up to 120 and 45 cents, it rounds it down to 44 cents. Instead of every single mile though, it's only the one time, the final odd mile. Okay, same things here. You can narrow it down to show only the ODC items that you're invoicing for. Because it's cost plus fixed fee, you can add another anything else that you have in your ODC categories. We'll make it red so the PM knows or the reviewer knows that that's been added. Once you have that information done, subconsultants. Subconsultants was a really big one when we took into consideration when we were building this process. Just because of the time it would take for subconsultants to enter in their information, making things populate correctly. At this time, we are only doing a single line item for all subconsultants. So whatever invoice they give you, you'll put that line item in and all of their backup documentation will go in for the project manager to review at the end. Okay, so I'm just gonna do $1 here, keep it nice and simple. Everything's been entered. If there's anything you need to explain, credit, if there was a credit taken and on here, we don't have a line for a credit. So what you would do is you would decrease one of your, other areas. There's an ODC item that when we were doing some vetting that they give a credit for some overhead or a building rental basically. So instead of charging the $500, they only charge them $250, and they would just note that credit as in the notes section. That notes section is up here for invoice notes. Anything entered in here will be added to the invoice and printed. Once everything is ready to go, you'll review your current invoice total, make sure that matches what your backup documentation has. Also shows a breakout for the ODC items, any subs, and all the information. This will also start to calculate the minute you create your invoice. So prior invoices instantly shows you how much you've billed against this, what you're currently, and how much you'll have left after this invoice is submitted. So that's a really good tool on both sides. You know, if you're getting close to what your maximum not to exceed is, or if you need to do any type of modification. So that is just a way for you to see in a glance that that's how close we are to the contract total. Once you're ready to submit, you would just submit to UDOT-PM, and it will ask you if you're ready to upload your documentation at this point. All of your backup documentation does need to be included in a single PDF. So you'll merge all your documents together and upload it in one shot. If you're ready, just select yes, and it will actually open up your files right on your computer. Attach it. The next piece that comes up is the acknowledgement for the invoice. With this change, all our comptrollers will be paying from the amount that's included on the UDOT invoice that you're creating. This is just a quick agreement to say that you understand that and that they're able to pay it. There was some small discrepancies before with minor cents due to mileage that would get kicked back or anything like that. So we're hoping that this will, for minimal changes, discrepancies, that the consultant's aware and that we will still push through the invoice for you. Is this your final invoice for this payment on this contract? Yes or no? If you hit yes, you will no longer see that it is available to create another invoice against. Now, it'll go to the PM, and the PM has the opportunity. It'll ask them, this was flagged as your final. Do you agree, and have you did your final eval? If they reject it, you can change it and go resubmit it with, no, this is not my final invoice. So that is fixable that way. So I'm going to go ahead and select no, that this is not my final invoice. And at this point, it's been submitted to the UDOT-PM. Emails are sent out letting them know that they are ready. And I'll show you what that email looks like when we get to the PM approval side. So a lot of information, but please let me know if you have questions. Go ahead. Right here.
When does this start? And are the typical cover sheets still required for the
Okay. So the question was, when does this start, and are the cover sheets still required? The question, the first one is, this will go live Monday, September 24th. So if you have any invoices that are in process right now that your PM has, those will still be approved manually and sent down to comptrollers. If your invoice is not in the project manager's hand by the 24th, then it will need to go through the CMS system, and they'll be letting you know, sorry, this needs to go through that system. So September 24th is the answer for the first one. And the next one is the cover sheet. We are not requiring any of the pay requests, any of that backup documentation. If there's a certain tool that your project manager uses and they want you to upload it, I would consult with them and just talk to them and say, okay, that's probably where most of the questions are going to be. It's going to be, okay, what does this backup documentation need to include? At this point, it's going to be your standard backup documentation. It's going to be a copy of the consultant invoice. It's going to be any labor reports. It's going to be all of your receipts. It's going to be any of the other information. And when we do unit pricing, I was going to cover local government, so I'll cover that here in just a minute. And then anything else that would be required for that invoice. So basically the same without the wet signature requirement forms that we are currently having you provide. Go ahead. Oh, either one. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I got two. First one is quick, so I'll ask that one first. Normally, we have to ask PM's permission to add an employee. So do we not have to give their authorization? Is that what you're saying?
So good question. If on cost plus fixed fee right now, you can bill outside of it. If your project manager still wants you to, I would absolutely talk to them first, because it is their contract. They are approving your invoice. If it's going to make the approval process quicker, I would definitely talk to them. Is it required outside of the system? You bill actual. So if they worked, you can add them. But that communication with your project manager is crucial.
I have a second question. Second question is on the rate of pay. Currently, I charge rate of pay based on the contract that we have signed contract. So are you saying that we are allowed to charge for higher rate when the contract says $60 and the new rate is 65, we can just charge 65? Are we not supposed to stay with the contract?
Okay, so the question is, right, currently she's invoicing at the rate on the contract. Can they invoice for the higher rate? The answer is yes and no, because it depends on the type of contract you have. If it's unit price, you are absolutely locked to that contracted rate. If it's a cost plus, it should be actual rates.
Then what's the purpose of contract? Sorry.
No, that's okay. Do you do a cost plus fixed fee contract?
Yes, but when we invoice it, so we might have three different, invoices, three different projects. They might not all have the same rate that we're charging, because what if one contract it's 3 years old and one is today's contract? It's not going to have the same rate of pay, but we charge for the hours, but the rate of pay we agreed upon based on the contract.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes. Correct. So if your modification, cost plus fixed fee is actuals. You might have special circumstances, which you're right, that's what a contract is for. So I would just make sure you talk to your project manager and you would bill whatever the terms are within that contract. Cost plus fixed fee general terms are that you bill your actuals. So in a nutshell, so you would bill within the terms of your contract. The amount that's going to populate on the invoice is going to be your current rate. So if your negotiated rates where I'm not going to bill over this, then no, you wouldn't bill over that amount.
So when you're making the invoice, are they going to have the same rate coming up on the screen for all your invoices? Is that what?
No, it is contract specific.
Okay.
So the amount that populates will, but cost plus, because you do bill actuals, you have the ability to change it if you need to.
I can add. So if the person gets a raise in the middle of the contract, you're able to adjust it through this new system, but you will not be able to bill beyond the contracted amount, overall amount.
Correct.
As long as you stay within it, then you're fine. I can bill at the new rate.
Yes. So your maximum not to exceed is, it's absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. Go ahead.
So I'm not sure if this is the same thing as the cover sheet question, but things like progress reports, things like the sheets that used to have like work percent done, billing percent done, that kind of information, is that the cover sheet stuff that she was?
That is the cover sheet stuff she was saying.
So unless the PM is requiring
Correct.
progress report, then we don't need those progress reports?
That's correct.
Wow.
The only time it's required is if the PM requires it.
So we'll talk about that.
Yep.
The second question really quick is, when you said that if we say this is the final invoice, and then it goes through and the PM says it's final, we've actually had it happen where then the PM will come back and say, oh wait, we have this other thing to do. And so we thought it was a final, but then we kept going because the PM changed it. If that happens, is there a way this system will able to say, if all parties along the line said final, done, boom, is there some way to back that up, or is at that point, is it just, we're gonna have to do a new contract?
Okay. The question is, if it's marked final, is there any way to backtrack that? And the answer is yes, there is a way to backtrack it. We can back it up in our system as long as it has not been closed in FINET. If it's made its way all the way down to comptrollers, they've entered it in FINET, and they've marked it final, it's a done deal. Correct. Yep. Go ahead.
Show us out there how you do when we hit fixed fee, and you can bill the whole amount of your fixed fee. So if we run short and we've still got $2,000 left of fixed fee, we can still bill before we bill that out.
So fixed fee, they're actually, right now it's going to be done in the notes section, and we have to enter in a single line item, which would be done through an ODC. And in this system right now, I don't have the exact amount, the exact line ready for it right now. It is being, we will be able to do it, and it will be done through an ODC item. So it'll show you. Right. And the way that you do that is because the fixed fee is only done on cost plus fixed fee, and you can add an ODC item, where on unit price, we don't have that issue. So you would, that's where we would be adding it. It's to be, if there was nothing else on the contract. Or not the contract, I'm sorry, invoice.
The running fixed fee.
Yes.
Just the final fixed fee balance.
Right. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
On your invoicing and your junior start and end date, we would still approach that the same. If you have an invoice that spans 2 or 3 months, you want your start date to be indicated in that labor for that invoice.
Yes, you want it. Her question was for the dates. Your start and end date, do you want it to match, even if it spans over 45 days or a month, do you want it to be actual start date and actual end date? And the answer is yes. So whatever your backup documentation shows, those are the dates that should be on your invoice. Okay, and honestly, I'd make a note in there, in the note section that prints on your invoice to say this does span a certain amount of days so that they know that it's not an error. Go ahead.
If you're changing someone's rate, I know it adds a new line item for them. Will it then move the contract hours from the old rate, the contract hours remaining from the old rate up to the new one? Or will it leave that at 0 and just leave hours available on the original one?
It'll change it to 0 and leave hours available on the original one.
And then the CMS is not going to be tracking for activity.
No, it's line item only.
And then,
So cumulative.
sorry.
No, don't be.
The fixed fee, is that automatically accounted for as a percentage?
Yes.
Based on?
Mm-hmm.
So if you get to the point that you switch some money between ODCs and man hours, and you're now exceeding your fixed fee, will the system automatically account for that? Or do you need a negative ODC?
So the system will it should automatically account for it. That's how it was built, so that you would see it. You would see that there's no fixed fee left. In all the totals on the right-hand side, and when we go to approve it as a PM, we can look at what those totals are because your project manager would be looking at those. You would see the amount left of those items. Okay. And ODCs is kind of a funny one because, you know, you can bill over on the quantity, you just can't exceed the maximum cost on the ODC item. Jordan, are we having issues or a question online?
3 questions for you.
Yeah.
So
I'll get right to you.
does adding an employee to the invoice automatically submit them as alternate staff, or does the alternate staff request need to be made separate?
So the alternate staff request does need to be made separately. We are looking into adding it directly to the system, which would send an email to the PM to say, hey, go in and approve this. Right now, it still does need to be added to the system separately.
Next question, for overhead charges, are we also entering it as a line item under ODC?
Overhead is automatically calculated into the invoice. So maybe I'm not completely clear what the question is, but it's automatically calculated in. It is not its own line item.
Last one, does labor still need to be invoiced against project-specific tasks, progress report from the project delivery, or are hours only tied to employee?
Hours are only going to be tied to the employee, so you will not have, it will not be tracked per task. So it's a single line item, cumulative hours for all of work performed. Go ahead.
It does sound like it'd be helpful to find out if in general progress reports are going to be needed, because that's something we'll all have a question on and how we track it. But I did have a question on the invoice date.
Yes.
You have the beginning and end date. Right now, we also have the date that we sent in the invoice, or the day for the invoice. Is that going to be in the system when you hit submit? Is that going to be identified as the invoice date, or is that?
Yes. The date that you submit the invoice will be called the invoice date. If it's returned and then resubmitted, it'll actually show the invoice date, which would be the date that it was first submitted. And then if that date was different from if it was returned and then resubmitted, you would see the final time that the consultant submitted that invoice. So this does have a lot of built-in matrix now, and we'll be able to see exactly where the holdups are, how often invoices are being returned, and for what reasons they're being returned.
Do you have any more time for another question?
Yep, we have 2 minutes.
So another question on the final invoice marking.
Uh-huh.
Can we do it, say that the invoice you didn't mark it as final and it goes to the comptrollers, gets paid and everything, but then later on you say, oh, that was the final invoice. We haven't had any additional charges. Is there a way to change it at that point?
At this point, we have not built that in, and we probably would be able to still go into the system and manually do it ourselves. We just wouldn't have a contract marked final, but we could mark it final on our side. And the reason why we don't have that right now is because of that fixed fee issue. So if you have that final fee that you need to go in and bill, because a lot of times that's what it is. I think that this is done, but it's not. I'm not quite sure. So you go back in the system and you're billing that single line item. So, go ahead.
Wouldn't it just be safe to never mark that it's final?
So,
Can I make a suggestion on that? What if you guys make the PM mark it as final when they do the evaluation? Because when they do the evaluation, it's final, right?
yes, but they're 2 separate systems. So we do ask them, so if the consultant says this is my final invoice, then the PM has to say that they've marked this their final. Have you completed your final evaluation? So we're trying to time together, but they're two separate systems.
Another comment I want to make is the controllers and the PMs they're not necessarily looking for the same documents.
Right.
You know what I mean? So you're saying if the PM is okay with certain documents, give them that, but they might be okay with certain documents or less than, but then when it goes to the comptrollers, they're looking for something else. So you guys need to decide, and I'm thinking the comptrollers needs to decide what is it they want and tell all the PMs that's what they want, and they can just tell us what they want.
So their standard
So it's all
is,
the same.
their standard backup documentation requirement is anything that's billed on your invoice. So if you have hours, we need labor reports. If you have billable items, we need your receipts. And that's the basic requirement from the comptrollers. That's really all. They're not concerned with the project progress, because to them, if the PM is managing their project, then they can go in and they know if these are accurate or not. For auditing, that's the same thing. They look for hours, make sure that the labor reports match those hours, and that the backup documentation, the receipts for items that are purchased or any of those other, billable items have proof that they were used. So that is honestly what comptrollers requires on the financial side for auditing purposes, is the proof that what you're invoicing for was used for that project.
So if specific PM decides, yes, I want a progress report, is that PDF put in that stuff that you sent? Or
Yes.
is that on the side different?
Nope, everything would be included in the backup documentation, single PDF, everything compiled, so that we have everything in a single snapshot of what's being evaluated to approve this invoice. You're welcome. So we are going to move on to unit price, but I have time for questions after that one too, so we'll answer more. And the basic format is exactly the same. So as you see the system, you'll see that, there's going to be a little bit of differences because you can't add things, but we're pretty much there. So if you think of another question on this one, you will be able to ask it after unit price. Okay. So same thing here. I can go in invoice eligible. You'll see that this cost plus, we just submitted an invoice for, but you can create another one against it right now. This second one is for a unit price contract. So I'm just going to double click on the NTP date to create that header. And on the on-call, I'm going to do it, on the unit price, I'm going to do it a little bit different. So I'm going to bill it as if it was the first invoice after NTP, just so you can see that that's the system, the piece that triggers if that backup documentation for outside invoices, if there was previous invoices, that's what triggers it, is that date. So the NTP date was June 1st. I'm going to leave that date as the invoice start date. and through the end of June, automatically defaults 30 days after. So even if you start on June 15th, the system will move it to July 15th. But you have the ability to change those. All right, through the end of the month there, going to change it to my remittance address, make sure the check goes in the right place, and save the invoice header. Again, saving that invoice header is what populates everything in from the contract. So here are the people that you have hours for. If you just go through, you can use your tab button, automatically adds things to it. All the rates populate. Now this is a unit price, as you can see here. So the rates populate, they populate what the contract rate is. If I wanted to go in and say, oh, this person, instead of 51, we're gonna do, I don't know, $55. You can see that the system automatically puts it back down to that $51 an hour. You cannot bill above what your contracted rate is. However, if they weren't performing that duty or whatever it might be, and you needed to change it down, you can change it down because a unit price contract, you can change down, you just can't go up. Okay, you'll notice at the bottom, we have the same function to where you can show employees on the invoice. So just those 2 employees, but you can't add an employee. Unit price is locked down. There's nothing, and without a mod, you cannot add anything to the invoice. ODCs is the same way. You can add the mileage there. You can change the mileage down if you wanted to, but you can't go over that contracted amount. And it will populate that. So I do want to talk a little bit about ODC items in unit price contracts. Right now, it populates exactly what your contract says. We advise right now to add your hotel rates as CONUS without tax. Well, this system, because you can only bill for what it says, which is within contract terms, you will not be able to add that second line item for tax or go above the $91 a day. So if you have a unit price contract and you typically bill for CONUS rate hotels and add tax to it, you will have to modify your contract or not bill for the tax. Unfortunately, that's the only way we could do it, make sure the system's locked down. There's ways that you can rewrite it. So when you mod your contract, if you write it with a hotel with tax, the rate's 91 and you add your tax rate in there, say that your hotel is going to be 116 and then you bill actuals. So the hotel really was, we can bill up to 120, but the actual rate was 116.97. You have the ability to go lower with unit price. So you'll want to make sure that that is included with whatever that unit cost is that you're putting on your contract. Okay, same thing here, show ODCs on invoice. I've done both, so kind of that's what they are. You'll see that this one doesn't have the sub-consultants tab. That's because there's no sub on this contract. So the system's intuitive enough to know they don't need to enter sub, so I'm not just going to leave a blank screen there. That's why you don't see that one there. Show invoice history. This is the first one, so there isn't going to be anything in that screen. Invoice notes works the same way. You can add this. It will actually print on your invoice. All your totals are over here on the side, so you can see that there's a little bit of less information because you don't have your overhead rates. You don't have any of that information on the right-hand side. So it strictly goes over to your ODC items, your labor, and then your total invoice, and you can still see your amount left to bill against this contract. Okay, so unit pricing is pretty straightforward because you can't manipulate the invoice outside of contract terms. All of these functions were driven from your contract terms. Same thing, submit to UDOT invoice. If this was your final invoice, if you selected yes, your backup documentation, any notes, these are communication notes, so this will be in your email notification to your PM. Hey, this is my final, whatever you want to say, you can do that and you can submit that in there. This is your final invoice payment on this contract. You're going to hit yes again and submit it. So the one piece I do, if this was a local government contract, so this is a new feature, not new feature, more of a new process, sorry. So if this was a local government contract, you would have another screen that popped up and said, this is a local government contract. Do you have your signed local government form? Okay, it's gonna be a new local government form, which is similar to the pay request that the local government was required to sign. It's gonna be online. Would be included in your backup documentation. It's the only piece that requires a wet signature for the invoice approval. All local government will require a wet signature on the authorization form. So, yes. So basically right now, local government processes, if you have a local government on the contract, you would, on your payment request, the PM signs it, local government signs it, consultant signs it. Everything's on one form. We don't require wet signatures for the PM and for the consultant anymore because it's tracked within the system. Local government still requires that wet signature. So it will be the consultant's responsibility to get that form signed and uploaded with their backup documentation when they submit their invoice. The form basically shows the amount that you're invoicing UDOT against this conjoined contract. So it's going to be the amount. It will, nope, it'll be basically the same form. It'll be a new form with the same language that's already there.
When is that going to be available? The new form.
Will be online by the end of this week.
Would we be able to print out a copy of the invoice from this system to include with that? Is that possible? Is that not?
So you can do that. So once you start creating it, when we open it up, I'll show you on the bottom of the screen, you have the option to print the invoice. Yes. Yeah. So you could do it that way. But again, it's that wet signature that has to be uploaded with the backup documentation. So that piece is a little different. We talked to a lot of the PMs. We don't have a way for them to get, they don't use EPM or CMS right now. They don't get into our system. Most of them don't even have access to it. So it is a secondary form. It does not come out of EPM. It is not included. It's really just an Adobe form that needs to be signed, merged with your other backup documentation prior to submittal. Okay. So I submitted that unit price contract, and you can see that now it's no longer eligible to be invoiced against. So it really does just kind of close it right out of the system. So that's unit price. They're very similar, and we can take questions. Nope, you're good.
How are the consultants going to access to this? Is the programs that they're automatically, their profiles are going to be uploaded to see these screens?
Yep. So I said in the beginning of the training that it'll automatically be added to all of the administrators. So the contract administrators that manage the consultants' accounts will have full access to it. And then anyone with PM privileges will have view access. And to create an invoice, the administrator will have to give you a new profile access. Does that make sense as far as accessibility or your profile usage? It'll be a profile specifically for invoicing. That'll be the only access for it. Go ahead.
Back just in as the administrator, where you can go into
Give people rights.
Screen,
Exactly.
It's just one more choice there.
Yep.
To give to ever
Can create. Yep. You can create it. So the PM profile will have view. So they'll be able to see if invoices were created against it, but they can't modify or change anything. But if you need somebody in your company to create invoices, you would add that profile so they can create invoices. Because I'm in test right now, I won't, but when we get in there, I will put a tutorial online with that. And we do have right now online already the tutorial on how to assign profiles for the consultant administrator. So I will make sure that I do a separate tutorial for that. Go ahead.
Have that access and the person to create invoice?
Yes.
Okay. They
Yes.
shouldn't be using the same login. They should.
Yes, absolutely. Because when you submit it, it date stamps and grabs that user profile. So CMS, part of the authentication of that and security of that is that each user has their own username and passwords. So when you go in, it documents your name, and we know that it was you that was doing that. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry, guys.
I have a few questions on the employees and how they're added in cost plus fixed fee and unit price. So there's no correlation between the consultant employee screen where we're adding individuals and the invoicing system. So if we go in and someone gets a raise and we go under consultant and then to the employees tab and change that employee's rate, when we go into invoicing, the rate that's going to show is the rate they had for the invoice, right?
Depends on the contract type. So cost plus fixed fee pulls your current rate.
Okay.
Pulls your current rate. Unit price pulls the contracted rate because you can't deter from that contracted rate.
And so then if you're editing or adding an employee through the invoicing, does it change your employees under the consultant employees tab?
No, it does not. So if you have a cost plus fixed fee invoice, her question was, if you change the employee's information on the invoice, does it update the 930 screen for the employee profile? And the answer is no. If you update that information, it'll show it on the invoice. And then if you're adding an employee, so cost plus fixed fee, you click on add employee and it populates that list of name. That list of name is coming from that 930 screen. That list of employees is coming from the consultant's employee list. So you cannot add somebody on the invoice if they are not tied to your company already.
One more question on employees. So on a unit price contract, if we have added someone to all staff and then they've been contract approved and everything, will they automatically show on that first screen since you can't add an additional employee?
Yes, if they are alternate staff, they will show on that screen. Go ahead.
Where do you add the remittance address?
So the remittance address, and I'll cover that in another tutorial as well, but it's done in the same place. So as the administrator, you have access to the 930 screen, and you would just add, under addresses, you would just add another address line.
On that same item, there's no option for a third address, an address where the payment is sent, an address where our financial screening comes from, and our primary address. So there's no third option.
So right now, it's not required, but after you start updating your accounts, we are going to, if you're familiar with the administrative 930 screen, there will be another box for a remittance address. If you're not, I apologize. I don't want to confuse anyone, but you will have the ability to add multiple address types. And any address type that you add will be in that drop down. Okay. It does not capture that information right now. If Comptrollers has it on file, then it would still be the same remittance type. I think there was one right back here that I kept seeing. It is handled with the Comptrollers, and if it's currently how it's being done, it will continue to be that way. And use that note section to print on your invoice because they will see that. Okay. Go ahead.
So I thought when you did the cost plus, you updated the employee's rate. And I thought you said that once you did that, you wouldn't have to update it again.
Once you do it on an invoice, it'll automatically roll over to the next invoice, but it will not update their profile.
So pull from time to time, check and see if it's been updated on previous invoice.
Yes. So if you update it on one contract invoice, it will not be updated to the next contract invoice. Yes. Yes. Go ahead.
We often have projects that are in CMS, but we are not the prime consultant. As a sub-consultant, do we just bill our consultant?
Yes. All subs will continue to bill the primary consultant the same way. All backup documentation, their invoicing will all remain exactly the same. The prime will add the single line item on the UDOT invoice and upload all backup documentation for that sub.
Also, no more task codes seems way too good to be true.
That is confirmed. Right now, everything is done on a single line item, and it will be all just labor. Your labor reports will be the proof of cumulative hours worked. We do have a couple of online questions, so.
So between primes and subs, let's say a prime is billing the 1st through the 31st of the month, the sub is Friday to Friday. Do those have to sync up? Or
because they're in, you're the one being paid by UDOT. So when you submit it, that you're the one tracking it. And then all of their backup documentation will be uploaded after it. You should, however, in your notes section, document that your sub bill dates are different and include those as a note on your invoice.
So the question over there actually just reminded me that we're actually a sub to somebody who is a prime. The invoice sent to you guys, and they just sent out a big email saying this UDOT thing is changing. Here's the training. This is what you need to do. You need to switch over to this UDOT system. That's wrong.
For sub-consultants. Correct. Yep. Right. Well, and they could have just been letting you know that if you are the prime on any contracts, making you aware of that. But the sub, if you are a sub-consultant on it, you will bill it directly to the prime. The prime owns the contract and will invoice UDOT.
We're going to have to do this. I don't think that's right.
Could be. Could be. You said we had some online questions.
Why isn't remittance address set?
So right now, remittance address isn't required. So primary is being set to default. Once everyone has a remittance address in there, it will default to the remittance address.
Can we print our invoices out?
Yes, there will be a print button once you've created the header. Anytime after the header is created and you have one item in there, it doesn't give you the option to print until you have at least one line item to invoice. Once there's a total amount due, you can print the invoice.
Are employees limited to on-call contract or each task order?
So for unit price on-call contracts, the invoice will be populated with all the employees that are on the contract, not the work task order.
What backup documentation needs to be uploaded for unit price contract?
So unit price contract is the same requirement as cost plus and the other contract types. If you're billing for labor, all labor reports need to be included. All ODC items must have a receipt, and then any other items must be proof of use or receipted, really. Okay.
We have, and including the UDOT payment request and progress report for consultant services from our, is that still?
So with the new system, no. The wet signature forms are not required. So your payment requests and the other documentation, the only wet signature and additional form that's required is for local government. Go ahead.
Is there any way on that local government that electronics work?
So electronic signature, it will be a form, field form, an Adobe form where they could send it out. And if they have an electronic signature, absolutely. Just has to prove that they've seen the information. Go ahead.
Is there a file size limit to the PDF upload?
No, there isn't. Okay. We do have a couple more minutes.
Jeff, just a quick question. So say as we're working through this, we get stuck. Is there a point of contact for questions? And by the way, I was on the committee that was involved with this, done an incredible job.
Thank you.
Very challenging. This is a big deal in terms of getting paid faster. Thank you for all your efforts. But if anyone has questions, who's the best person to call?
So right now at this point, I've been the project manager this far, and I will see it through implementation. So feel free to contact me. Moving after the initial implementation is done, your project managers are probably going to be your strongest resource, because most of the questions are going to be centered around what do I need to upload? What backup documentation do you need? And they're the ones approving these invoices. So they're the ones that are going to be able to say yes or no. If you get in there and you're like, that amount is wrong, employees aren't on here that should be, something like that, a system issue, send it to EPM support, and they'll facilitate it through consultant services and the developers. Go ahead.
Are we able to do credits for ODCs, or example, if you're issue a credit to UDOT, or do that through the ODC stream?
So right now, credits has kind of been one we're trying to, we don't want to, it depends on the contract type. And so we're trying to figure out how that is right now. Right now, most of the time a credit is given, but it's never a full credit balance. So when comptrollers look through theirs, very, very, very rarely, in fact, we couldn't find them, that it was a true negative invoice where UDOT was owed money. So we've been saying just to take it as a line item credit and leave it in the notes section. Okay. Go ahead.
Question to follow up on the question that was asked from online about the work task orders. So currently, we have been submitting one payment request with one of our accounting system invoices per work task order. So what is the preference, I guess? Is it to wait until we're certain of all charges on every work task order and submit one invoice? Or is it frowned upon to submit multiple invoices on a contract for the same date range? And
Good.
Can you submit multiple invoices for the same date range?
Good question. So work task orders are essentially their own mini contract. So if you have one on-call contract with multiple work task orders, a separate invoice needs to be created for each work task order. Because of that, your dates cannot overlap. So even in the system, if I just created an invoice for that August 1st through August 30th, if I tried to say, well, this invoice is going to start August 28th and go through September 30th, the system is going to go, whoa, no, it's not. You cannot bill, the earliest you can bill is September 1st. So the date ranges cannot overlap in the system. It is safeguarded against that. Work task orders have to be billed all individually, which alleviates that overlap of dates for different work task orders on the same contract. Does that make sense?
I'm still a little bit confused.
Okay.
So when we go in to do it, when we get to this screen here, there will just be one line for the contract level, or there will be multiple lines where we'll see each of the work tasks?
Multiple lines where you'll see each of the work task orders. Go ahead, sorry.
Are there plans to add the sub-consultants?
So we have sub-consultants was a big discussion when we were developing this. And we take a lot of different things into consideration. So if we open it up and integrate all the sub-consultants information, the primes billing could be held up by the subs billing. And that's where our major conflict is. So as we get into the stream of things and we notice that things are getting returned less and that sub-consultants are more familiar with the system and billing, you adapt and change your processes a little, we are very open to adding sub-consultants. But right now the risk is a little bit too high holding up a prime since they're actually the one with the contract with UDOT. The sub is not contracted with UDOT, it's with the prime. Go ahead.
So when our consultants sign in using their sign-in in the CMS, all their work task orders are going to show that's tied to their name or to their company, and so they can click on it to submit an invoice. Is that how that works?
Yes. So if that person, that user, has access to create invoices, they would go to the 917 screen, which is the invoice status screen, and a list of all work task orders would be shown on that screen, which is why this at the top here is kind of important. Right now I have 2 or 3 contracts showing that I can invoice against. There's some people that have, lines of invoices. So that's why you can search for a work task order or a contract number right here at the top. It'll pull that up and then you can double click to create it. You don't have to scroll through all of them. So if they have access to create an invoice, it'll show there. Go ahead.
Oh, we didn't already answer this. If I'm ready to bill on September 24th, my 15th pay request, will all other 14 be in CMS, or do I have to catch up the system?
You have to catch up the system. And that was So the first example I did, and I actually think that you did miss that. So because the date, your work dates that are entered in the system, it knows you're billing later than the NTP date. So it's going to say, wait a minute, enter all these totals for invoices that were created outside of CMS. And I think there's 3 fields. It's your burden, labor, your ODC, and then a combined. So most of that information, you'll be able to find on your previous pay request. Yeah, just one cumulative amount.
But it will automatically pop up.
It'll automatically pop up. If you bill it later than the NTP date, it'll automatically ask you that question. Oh, looks like you have other invoices. Tell me those amounts. Jordan, others online?
Yeah. Is there an old year, new year check to ensure these are combined?
Can you provide more information?
Other question. Can you please go over the upload backup document steps again? That step?
Yes. When we do the lump sum, which is next, I'll show you at the wording and other requirements. The process is exactly the same. So we will go over that again. So we can actually, oh, go ahead.
A couple more questions. More so about the coordination of when things are submitted and who's seeing what. Right now, once we submit an invoice, we're sending it to our project manager and I copied Vicki at Region 2. So who gets notified once that submit button is clicked in our organization as well as at UDOT?
Okay, good question. So the question is, once you submit that invoice and your backup documentation, who's going to be notified? So the PM or it's actually the UDOT primary contact from your contract. Typically they're the same, sometimes they're a little different, but that person will be sent an email saying this consultant with this invoice number is ready to be reviewed. And the secondary contact is also emailed saying, which a lot of the times is those PM specialists in the different regions saying, hey, this invoice is ready for review.
Is there any kind of notification that goes out to our organization, like our project manager?
So whoever submits it will get an invoice as well. Same exact verbiage. We'll just say that this has been submitted and is ready for review. So you will get a copy of that invoice or that email.
And then what happens if there's a discrepancy or something on our invoice and so it has to be changed or corrected?
On your invoice or the invoice you're creating in CMS?
So say they don't match. So if our backup documentation doesn't match what we've submitted and the PM gets it and it's being reviewed and that's noticed, how does it come back to us to fix that?
So if a project manager gets in there and they realize that your backup documentation isn't sufficient, they're going to reject your submittal. An explanation is required. You'll get an email saying this invoice has been rejected. In the body of that, it'll tell you why. You'll have to refix your upload. When you hit submit, you have to upload that same documentation again. So it does not save any documentation because everything needs to be in one document. So it'll drop off, they'll review it, you'll make your changes, and then it will go back. So because this is all exactly from the contract, if there's a discrepancy, pay close attention to your accounting because something's off somewhere.
But if you're off a penny or 5 cents or something like that, you just address that in the notes. How would you handle that?
You can. So the communication notes, when you're saying, those notes that are on that agreement site that say, I acknowledge that I've read this and understand UDOT is going to pay from the UDOT invoice, you could leave a comment in there. I realize we're 3 cents difference. It's due to mileage. It's due to this. It's due to that. You can leave that communication note right in there because you are accepting that UDOT's paying from that, our contract, our invoice.
Just to clarify that if your backup documentation covers more than what you're billing, they can accept that. So if your backup documentation says you're good for $10 and you bill for $9.73, the $9.73 is what we're paying because that's what your invoice says. But if the backup documentation it shows for $10 and you're billing for $10.53, we cannot accept that invoice that way because we have to have the documentation that at least covers the cost.
Correct.
So that's when it would be rejected, but the other way it won't be rejected. And you only be billed for what that UDOT invoice says.
Yes. Go ahead.
So walking us through this, what you're seeing on the screen there, when we first come in, it'll be on the invoice eligible. Once we submit it, we go to the next tab. No, once we start to fill it out, we go to the next tab, right?
Yep, once you hit create that header, it automatically moves it here. So if you hit return like I did, you don't lose anything. You just have to go to invoice started but not submitted.
When we submit it, it goes to the next tab.
Yep.
But if they reject it, it drops back to the
Not submitted tab.
So that's where we look for one rejected.
Yes.
Is under the invoice message.
Yes. So if something was returned to the consultant, you would go back into the invoice not submitted tab and evaluate their comments and re-upload and submit your document. Go ahead.
So you've been pretty clear that you don't need the pay request form anymore. But like what we do is our pay request is actually part of our invoice. You do still need the invoice, right? You want to see the invoice.
Absolutely. Yes. The invoice is required. Right. And if it's built in, if it's not much more work for you, submit it. But the invoice is absolutely required.
This is
Go ahead.
just more of a comment for my friends in the room. I feel that it's probably in our best interest to remain doing the progress report for the staff changes that happen. If the PM takes over after one leaves and then so they suddenly want it and you're on invoice 15 and there's 6 more to go, I just feel like it might be easier for everybody if we continue to do it. That's going to be my practice. I think it's safer. I do have a question though. Is the narrative important to UDOT at this point? And if so, would it go in the notes? Or if we chose to include it with our backup document?
From the progress?
It used to be like page 2 behind the payment request in front of the invoice per se, to say what you accomplished for them.
Great question. It's okay. It's not something that we have discussed as required as our new process. So I will find out for you and address that. But right now, the narrative, saying where you're at isn't required to submit the invoice. So if that's important to you to let your PM know that, you can use the communication notes to do so.
As a PM, I wholeheartedly support that. Just keep on including those in the support document.
Okay. Okay, I think I got one more question online and then we'll move to lump sum.
End of year.
Oh, okay. Yes, so the system is built to where it will not span across the fiscal year for your charges. So you cannot create an invoice in the system that spans from January or June 1 to June or July 1, or even June 15th to July 15th if you're a mid-month biller. It cuts you off and says you cannot span this because of the fiscal year and gives you an explanation of what needs to be done. So hopefully that does that. Oh my. I'm going to push this in and see. It's not that. Okay, so I'm going to move forward with lump sum. Again, we'll take questions after the process. The screens look very similar. The questions are, the requirements are pretty much the same. So you'll notice that I don't have, guys, I'm really sorry. I don't know what is doing that because it's not my HDMI cord. Oh. So you'll see that the lump sum contract is not there available for invoicing. And that's because lump sum is handled a little bit different. We don't have a lot of lump sum invoices, but because the contract language states that you invoice based on % work complete, you cannot start an invoice until it's marked paid in our system. Okay, so that's so the % complete stays accurate and there's not 25 and then 13 on this one, and the percentages never line up. So I have started a lump sum invoice, and it's pending comptrollers So I'm just going to open this one up because it is so straightforward. Same thing on the top. You'll enter in your firm's invoice number, the start and end date of the work, and all you have to enter is your percent complete. So if the contract was 25% complete, that's what you would bill for. Current invoice percent is 25%. That's your invoice total. That's your amount left, and that's your maximum not to exceed amount. It has to be coming from somewhere else. So that is basically all there is to a lump sum. And that's why I kind of started it before. And I can, you can add the same invoice notes. You can see the same invoice history. Everything remains exactly the same. Okay, so kind of just wanted to. Yes. So same thing here. I'm going to go ahead because it is. I do not know where it's coming from. So let me just, I'm going to jump in. That's just HDMI. So the power sources are actually the walls, which is the weird part. No. Mm-mm. No. Thank you, though. I am just going to log in, jump in real quick as a comptrollers. Okay, so I am kind of jumping out of routine here real fast. So comptrollers are kind of the same way. And again, I'm going a little bit out of the full process, so I apologize. They'll do the same thing. They'll go into the 917 screen, CMS invoice status, pending comptroller approval. I'm just going to default this to all instead of just my name. And mark it paid. Okay. Sorry about that. So I'm going to log back in as a consultant. So log back into CMS, go into our 917 status screen. And because I just completed that lump sum, you'll see now that it is actually on my list of eligible to be invoiced against. Before it wasn't there because there was one in process, and it's kind of just a safeguard so that the percentages don't get messed up in the billing. So now you can see the lump sum is there and the cost plus, but the unit price isn't because we marked that one as final. Open lump sum and create a new one. So you'll see that this NTP date was June 1st. The one that I just created went through, it spanned all of June. So this is default to me to the beginning of July. It'll automatically take me through to the end of July. Defaults to primary. You can update your address and save the invoice header. So now you can see that it already knows that 25% of this contract's been billed for. Adds it there. So 25 is complete, and with 25% complete, UDOT owes nothing. But if we bill it at 35% complete now, you can see that we're billing for an additional 10%, and our new invoice total is this. Okay, you can same thing, add invoice notes, show invoice history. So you can see that this was the one that we just completed. Go back to our invoice, and then when we're ready to submit to UDOT PM, this is the upload. So once you click submit, it's going to ask you, in order to submit this invoice, you're required to upload all your backup documentation in a single PDF. Are you ready to upload it now? If you select yes, it'll automatically open up your files. You would just attach your documentation, and this is where your comments could go if you were, any of progress report language, if you wanted to include that in here. It stays specifically with this invoice. But this agreement is just saying that you acknowledge that UDOT is going to pay from that UDOT invoice. Okay, so does that, as far as uploading backup documentation, does that make sense? Does that work? Any other questions there? Great. So once you submit agree, it's going to ask you if it's your final invoice again. It will ask you every single time. This is one of those things that we decided should we have a flag that they have to do. Consultant feedback told us that they'd rather be asked every single time than forgetting to do it during their invoice submittal. So if it's your final invoice, submit no, and then it says, okay, it's been submitted to the PM. At this point, that's when that email distribution goes out. Email goes to the PM, the backup, the secondary contact, and the consultant, letting them know that this has been submitted and ready for review. Okay?
And on the consultant side, the person who gets that notification is the one who submit.
It is the one who hits submit.
And did you guys talk at all about additionally notifying
Yes.
primary and decided not to?
No, so we can add people at this point. We just wanted to make sure that whoever's submitting it is being notified, and we can build that into the parameters if we want to say the person submitting it every time and the consultant PM we can absolutely add them to the email chain. So we just didn't want to bombard everyone with emails. So we can, and if we get enough, if that's something that is definitely wants to be done, the submitter and the consultant PM, let me know. So at this point, go ahead. Are we ready?
On here, it doesn't seem like there's a step where the project management specialist gets involved, like where they are part of it at all. What's their new role going to be in invoices? They're a huge help to us now.
So their new role, we don't require 2 evaluators anymore, 2 reviewers. Because we're locked to the contract terms, even on unit price, we do not have to have 2 approvers. So really it is the PM. The PM specialist gets notified. They can obviously search it, review the backup documentation, make comments for the PM, but they will not be approving invoices for payment.
But they'll get notified, they'll see it's there, they can go and do an advanced review.
Yep, yep, absolutely. And again, a lot of that.
Advanced review for what?
I'm not a UDOT.
I know, but that's the thing. The PM specialist does not, what they've been reviewing is your numbers. Does this number add up to this number? The system's now doing that. So the PM is supposed to be checking, is that work, I might be billed for the work that's being done. The PM specialist doesn't know that. So they're not going to be reviewing these invoices at all anymore. If it goes to the PM, they're responsible for reviewing.
Because the math component's reviewed, that's kind of gone.
Right.
The math component's gone.
So we have about 15 minutes left. I want to show you guys, so when I keep saying these email notifications will be sent out, this is the email to the PM. And it's a screenshot because I didn't want anything to freeze up on us. But so you'll see transportation consultant invoice test 3 is ready for review. This test is the comments that I put in that little comment box. So it comes in your email, and it also goes into online where the PM can review it actually right on the invoice. Okay, so now that I've showed you that, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to sign in as a PM. Okay, so if I was acting as a PM, I received my email saying, hey, this consultant is ready to have this invoice reviewed. I got my email, same thing. I'll log into EPM. I'll go into the CMS module, and I'll go back to that same 917 screen, okay, that same status screen. And again, this isn't a test environment. Well, this is. So you can see that as the PM, it'll default to their name and the people that they're responsible for. This is all of the contracts that are the invoices that need to be reviewed. So you can see that they are all here. I want you to take a quick glance at this cost plus. This is the same contract number. One is non-CMS invoice totals. So that was the one where they had to go in and enter in those, the cumulative amount that's already been invoiced outside of the system. If I go into this invoice first and try and approve it as a project manager, I'm coming in, this is what they're looking at. It's pending UDOT PM approval. I can see, I didn't leave any communication notes on this one, or they'd be able to see there. That's the communication notes that would be in the email. They can print the invoice. And it's just, so the PM would have the opportunity to print the invoice at this point, all the information, all of your contract information. Is it your final invoice? No. Any notes that you put, this was an invoice note, so test, it prints right on the bottom. This shows submitted by me on September 10th. Okay, so the PM would have they would look at the invoice, then they would go, okay, that's our invoice, let's evaluate all of their backup documentation. They would look at the consultant invoice, make sure that that matches. Look at the labor reports, make sure that matches. Any receipts and any other documents that are included in the backup documentation. Now that they have viewed this supporting documentation, the approve and the reject invoice buttons are available. I should have called out before just so you guys would have made sure you noticed, but these were grayed out. So the next one we approve, I'll show you that. Until you view those supporting documentations, the PM is unable to approve or reject the invoice. If we go to approve this invoice, remember this is the one that we had to enter in outside CMS totals. It has, you cannot approve this invoice because you need to approve the non-CMS totals. So the PM would just return to status, which takes them back to a list of invoices that they need to approve, and they have to approve that one first, okay? So they would open up this non-CMS invoice totals, verify that this information that they entered is correct. So they've already billed this much cumulatively against the contract, and they would approve it or reject it. Okay, so we'll go ahead and approve this one. Do you approve the startup invoice totals? Yes. Closes are out. Comptrollers will never see those invoices. That's specifically for the project manager and the consultant. Obviously, they'll be able to see the amounts that are billed on every subsequent invoice, but they don't have to approve that one. So now that we've approved that one, I'll go back into the one we just reviewed. Like I showed you before, we've already viewed this supporting documentation, but because I left this invoice and came back in, I have to view this documentation again. Can approve it or reject it. Once I open this up and view it, now I have the ability to approve or reject the invoice. So I would approve the invoice. Do you approve it for payment? Yes. And at that point, I can leave communication notes because the comptrollers is notified, the consultant's notified as well. Okay, so both parties in there. Also, this is going to give me an error. I just want everyone to know. I know it's coming. I'm in a test environment and it's trying to attach pieces of information from a different server. So I know it's coming. I'm just going to leave it there. What it's trying to do is populate and attach other things. So that's an error out to a different screen. So now that it's been approved, we tried to make it really easy for comptrollers. So they don't get an EPM, CMS is not their primary system. FINA is. So that once you submit that, the PM submits that, the attachments go directly to comptrollers and the consultants with the attachments in them. So the consultant will receive an invoice with both dates, approval dates printed on it, and the comptrollers will. So all they have to do now is go in and approve that. So I did another screenshot just so that we weren't moving back and forth. But this is what the email to comptrollers will look like. So the PM just approved it, and they'll say, this has been approved by Jennifer Avila for payment processing. Here's a copy of our invoice, and here's a copy of all the backup documentation. They do not have to get into our system to do that, and that puts a final copy in your hands as well. Okay, because that invoice is going to show you guys the submitted date and the actual PM approval date. Okay.
How quickly after you receive that notification will payment be processed?
So I've been told they said that once they get it and if there's no issues, that they're paying them anywhere from 7 to 10 days right now. Once they update it in our system, they mark it paid, and they do it for the actual date that it was finalized. So even if today is September 10th, but they paid it on Friday, if they aren't getting into the system to update it, they did tell us that there could be up to a 48-hour delay to update this system because they do it in Finet. They put all the paperwork into the official archive area, and then they go into EPM to market paid or CMS to market paid. Okay. So unless there's any other questions or you want me to open up another invoice to show you what a PM view looks like, I'll just sign in as a consultant or the comptrollers, I'm sorry, and show you what the final invoice looks like and what they do to market paid. Go ahead. Okay.
I didn't realize we were past it before we were past it.
No, you're fine.
We actually have a number of subcontracts
Mhm.
with my firm. And so I'm curious about what you said about another invoice until the last one is paid.
Yes.
Did I hear that right?
You did.
So even if we're ready to invoice the next one, if that last one is made, we have to wait.
Right. Because of it. So lump sum, and like I said, they're a little bit less common. So if you have quite a few of them, your percentage, the backup documentation and the review process for lump sum typically can be a little bit quicker. And so with this and everything being submitted and evaluated the same way, if you're invoicing only once a month, I don't see that as an issue at all. If you hold your invoices for 2 to 3 months, you're going to run into an issue. You're going to submit January and March, and then you're going to wait till January is paid to be able to set February. So it will create an issue.
And in a lot of those, because in those lump sums, it's multiple lines where there's a different equipment being delivered. Because there's only one field on there, percent complete, we're then just taking that whole thing and translating it to 1% complete of the contract.
Correct.
And then should we still, because that's information that PM would want?
Yep, all of that will still be backup documentation. You're welcome. Oh, go ahead.
If I have 4 sub-consultants, do I roll up all 4 into one line?
No, you don't. So sub-consultants work the same way as labor and ODC items. Each sub will be listed on there as an individual line item. So you'll leave a line item there. It'll show you what they were contracted amount, and you can bill up to that. All of the one thing that it does do in the system is they have it so, your percent work complete. So if the prime has to do 60% and sub is 40%, majority of the 40% can be all billed on one sub-consultant as well. So that's a cumulative work complete is that 40%. Okay. So go ahead, Jordan. Online questions?
Yeah. Can we submit multiple invoices under the same contract number, one PDF, or do they have to be uploaded and submitted?
So if I understood the question correctly, it's saying, do we upload, or we're creating one invoice but uploading multiple
invoices?
No, they all need to be done individually. The consultant invoice needs to match the UDOT invoice. So unless their invoice spans, that 60 days or whatever it is, they would need to do multiple invoices. Go ahead.
previous invoices?
You can, so if they were outside of CMS, you won't be able to access them in here because we're not inputting those individual invoices. But from the approval, so we'll just open it up as a PM view. And because this is that lump sum that we have 2 invoices against right now, you can show invoice history. So you can already see that they've billed this much on this invoice. So the PM has that right at their fingertips, as well as the consultants. You'll be able to see everything and all the dates that you've invoiced against. Okay,
So
go ahead.
There's no longer payment request number tracking through the system, correct?
Right. So we do capture that information on the background. So if there was ever an audit or anything like that, we have that information to provide how many invoices have been submitted. But because you can see right in on your show invoice history, you can quickly see every single date go back and forth, and the system's built so dates can overlap. So that number kind of becomes irrelevant.
Talk about some tutorials you're putting together. Where are those going to be available? When are they available?
So there's 3 online right now that are on the consultant services website. That goes for creating each type of contract. I also sent it out in the email. But so those will be on the consultant services website. We're going to do one specifically for local governments and one for entering your first invoice. So all of the previous invoice screen, and then one for updating your 930 screen. So those will also be found on the consultant services website. You're welcome.
Our normal billing cycle would be like the next week. Would it be preferred for us to wait and submit them all the following week under the system rather than?
So I'm going to say that is up to you, really, because it's your invoice, it's your date. I would say to get using the system as soon as possible. The more information in the system, the more information available to you to manage your contracts later on. You're welcome. Okay, so I know it's 4 o'clock right now. I'm going to log in as comptrollers just real quickly. They received their invoice saying that they need it to be evaluated and paid, that it's been approved by the PM. So they'll, same thing, they'll go into CMS, they'll go into contract, that 917 screen. Okay. So I should just have the one invoice to approve in here as a comptroller's. Like I said, since we've already been in here, they could use this right over here on the right-hand side. If there was questions on the invoice, they have the same access as the PM and the consultant have. So they would open this up. They can view their supporting documentation. They can reject it if there's something there that, if it's missing something they require, or they want to print the invoice. So I'm going to go ahead and just print the invoice so I can show you guys. This will be attached when the PM approves it. This will be attached and sent to the consultant as well. And it actually has the approval dates right at the bottom. So you can see it was submitted on the 10th and it was approved by the PM on the 10th. If that goes back and forth, the invoice date is the 10th. Say the PM sent it back to them today and they sent it in tomorrow. This is now going to say the 11th. So that submitted date is the final date that the consultant submitted it, and we paid from that. When it was correct. Yep, when all the information was there. So, and so this is kind of the final invoice. These are these are the 2 pieces of information that are replacing that wet signature. Okay, so at that point, comptrollers would just mark it paid. Submitted today, paid today, done deal. Okay, so that really just gives us a lot more tracking ability, a lot of performance measures, a lot of ways to say, okay, where are the issues? How can we help you? Because really that's what this was for. Go ahead.
Is there any way to build into the system so when the consultant wants to see when the check was actually cut, or mailed out?
So the payment date that the comptrollers enters, even if it's a day or two late, so say they get into our system today, they put the 7th, that is, they're entering the date that it was actually cut. So they're entering the final date. Is that?
So where do we see that in here?
Oh, well, let me just
Then we
return.
know that the check's been mailed.
So as a consultant, now you can see it in paid. And over here on the right-hand side, this paid date. This is, oh, I'm like, why is this not showing? It'll show you. Okay. So it'll show over here, the date that it was actually paid.
Okay, so then they know that the check was mailed.
Yep. Yep. And even if it's, like I said, even if the comptroller said it might be a 2-day delay, they will put in the actual date that it was completed and there's in finance and check was cut. Okay, so that is it. I know we're over by 5 minutes. Sorry guys, I have one question. I think we're good to go unless anyone else does. So we have one right back here and then I'll grab you. Go ahead. Good question. So the question was, if comptrollers rejects the invoice, how is everyone going to be notified? Same email string. So it will not go back to the PM because chances are if comptrollers rejecting it, it's because something's missing and it's going to fall back on the consultant. So we're eliminating that, okay, pushback process. It's going to go from comptrollers. It's mandatory that they enter in a reason why they're rejecting it. Emails will be sent back and it will go directly back to the consultant, okay, with an explanation why. And that rejection notification goes to the consultant, the PM, and the secondary contact. Okay? Go ahead.
Where the invoices are no longer billing per activity, does that mean contracts are no longer going to be per activity either?
Nope, contracts will remain per activity. Go ahead.
So if multiple invoices are submitted and the PM's a little backed up, and so maybe there are 3 invoices to be approved, and they look at the one that was submitted in July, and it has an error on it, what happens to the invoices for August and September? Does the system automatically read the cumulative?
Yes. It'll automatically, once it's pushed back, those totals will grab current totals in there. But they can still approve those other invoices. So if June was bad and they kick it back, but July is right, and all the backup documentation's right, they can pay July. They're just holding up June. So that's part of the benefit to this process as well. Okay, so I think we're good, guys. I know we have some people online, so if you have any other questions, I'm free to ask, but thank you so much for coming. Hi. Okay.